Welcome to Fields of Study from the Masonic Cancer Center. Today we sit down with Masonic Cancer Center member and associate professor at the College of Science and Engineering, Dr. Ben Hackel. Hello everyone and welcome to Fields of Study from the Masonic Cancer Center. My name is Max Huber. I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager at the Masonic Cancer Center. In this video series, we sit down with some of our faculty, staff, researchers, clinicians, nurses, and get to learn a little bit more about them, especially in today's coronavirus COVID-19 world. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Dr. Ben Hackel. He is an associate professor with the College of Science and Engineering at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Hackel, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much, Max.
Yeah, and obviously we are sitting in our own houses today as we have this conversation. How has coronavirus and COVID-19 affected the work and the research that you're doing?
Yeah, it's affected it in two very substantial ways, I guess. In one sense, the main operations of my research laboratory, as well as my teaching role here at BU, have both been impacted in terms of very much, hitting pause on that for a bit, and then modifying the nature of the way we implement that. So I guess pause on the research side as we transition to a remote way of doing that. So pausing the in-lab portion while staying full steam on performing our research, just in a different mode. Likewise for the teaching role, just transitioning to a different mode of operation in that sense. At the same time, it's also opened up a new thrust for us in that we've now started up some antiviral research in my lab, along with collaboration with others at the U. And so that's been exciting, of course, but for the context of it is obviously extremely unfortunate given the toll it's taken globally.
Yeah, and you talked about making that transition, going from the research that you're doing and adjusting into the coronavirus world. What's the basis of your research pre the whole pandemic?
Yeah, so my lab works on biomolecular engineering, and predominantly that's protein engineering. So the majority of the lab engineers proteins as molecules that can have selective activity inside the human body. And so that's for both diagnostics and therapeutics. So for example, in one arm of that work, we engineer proteins, very small proteins that can traverse throughout the human body and selectively attach to tumor cells, expressing particular biomarkers consistent of that type of tumor. And so that is a selective delivery approach, which we can then combine with some sort of diagnostic entity. So to empower molecular ultrasound or PET imaging or things of that type to inform the clinicians, not just that there's a tumor there, but to provide molecular information about that tumor so it can inform treatment decisions and stratify patients as being, for example, responders versus non-responders to particular types of therapy. Or that same type of engineered protein can selectively deliver the actual therapeutic entity of itself and provide treatment in that regard. That's in the realm of cancer. There's also an arm of my lab that works to apply those same sorts of molecular technologies, but to other areas, including infectious disease, where we generate antimicrobial proteins that are more selective and potent than natural molecules, as well as applications to growth receptor families for inflammatory disease and others.
Yeah, so you talked about cancer, you talked about infectious disease, inflammatory. So this wasn't too much of a stretch for your lab to kind of convert and go down the COVID-19 route then.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's certainly been a learning experience for me and for the whole group, for that matter, to learn more about the biology and virology of COVID, so that we would know where to apply our technologies. But in terms of the core expertise, the core sets of technologies and experiments that we run, in that sense, no, it was not a big shift. But we've had great help from our collaborators on campus to guide us towards what are the relevant targets that we should be engineering molecules against.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the adaptation from not only our researchers at the Masonic Cancer Center, but throughout campus to kind of adjust to the current situation and find a course to a greater good. In terms of your teaching, how was that for you, from going in a class setting to now doing things via Zoom or web-based instructing?
Yeah, it certainly was a shift, both for us and more so perhaps for the students. But I certainly was very impressed at how the students rose to the occasion to make that work well for them. So we obviously tried our best to provide the exact same level of interaction that we did before, using technology, Zoom as you indicate. but it's certainly just a different modality. And so I think in the end, it worked well in that I certainly felt very good that the students got the same high quality education that we've always, strived to give them in the past and did so now. And so, yeah, just learning on the fly about the best ways to implement technology. A lot of Zoom calls, a lot of interaction, but we're fortunate in the sense that we live in a technological age that we can do things like we're doing right now quite seamlessly. In fact, perhaps very thin, but nevertheless silver lining is it raises to the point some of the efficiencies that we can have for conversations like this. So hopefully there's some good that can emerge from that.
Yeah, and speaking of efficiencies, and just time management, I'm sure you're having more time to run and transitioning here. So you are an American Cancer Society researcher, had some funding by them, and you're doing something kind of fun, crossing our fingers it happens, but you are supposed to be running the Chicago Marathon this fall, raising money for the American Cancer Society. What inspired you to decide to run 26.2 miles for a good cause?
Yeah, so as you noted, I'm very fortunate to be a ACS grant recipient, and so that's a cancer diagnostic project that my lab works on, akin to some of the stuff I mentioned previously. And so through that, as well as through some previous interactions, I've been very fortunate to work with the Cancer Society on multiple aspects, largely on the scientific side, but also to some level on their community programs as well. And so I've always admired what they do for the whole community, be it patients, be it the scientific research community. And so with that as a backdrop, I'll also then mention that endurance sports are a big part of my life away from the U. My wife and I do it, my brother and I do it, a whole host of different activities from triathlons to marathons and things of that type. And so I really like that. Provides a nice work-life balance opportunity for me in that way as well. And so it's really just a confluence of those multiple things coming together of, looking for what's the next endurance challenge going to be, as well as ways to give back to the Cancer Society. And so found out that, Cancer Society had a team running in Chicago, and thought it'd be a great way to do my best to give back in that way. So raising funds to support the Cancer Society as I go on 26.2 miles this coming October. We'll see if it happens in Chicago. I suspect that it'll be more likely that my 26.2 is going to come on the streets of the Twin Cities in a socially distanced way, but time will tell in that sense. Obviously, it'll be implemented in whatever the most safe, beneficial way is going to be. But the key part is it'll give me a chance to reach out to people in my network and hopefully expand my network to meet more new people who can contribute in their own way to the Cancer Society, whether it be through, financial contributions towards that effort, or just the awareness of what the Cancer Society is doing, or even running with me. I'd be more than happy, whether it be in Chicago or whether it be socially distanced here in Minneapolis, to have people join me in that effort.
Yeah, and if you want to donate to Dr. Hackel's cause, that link will be in the information of the video here. Have you started your training yet? I know we're June, and usually you put 3 to 4 months of training in. Have you started getting some miles in on the streets?
I certainly have. I find, running and cycling, I guess, are the big two fitness ways that I integrate fitness into my life. And so I kind of try to always, to the best of my ability, for better or worse, stay in shape in that way. And so, I don't have as precise of a marathon training program as many do. But my wife and I ran one earlier, remotely, virtually, in the streets of Wisconsin as we were visiting some family. Got another canceled / remote marathon in, so we ran it there. And so I've just been doing my best to stay in a comparable level of shape here as the months progress. So that's the plan for October as well.
Yeah, I will applaud you and say that you are smart in the fact that you're running something in October. I ran the Disney Marathon in one January, and the weather was so bad I ended up doing 20 miles on a treadmill. And about 10 miles in, I was like, this is the worst decision I've ever made in my entire life. And kept going and going. But it's a great cause. Again, that link to donate to Dr. Hackel's cause will be in the information here and on the links provided in this video. So let's back it up a little bit before we start to wrap up the interview here. What got you interested in biological engineering, in studying infectious disease, cancer, whatever it might be?
Yeah, so great question. Depends how far we want to back it up, I guess, in terms of how I got interested in it. So I've kind of been an engineer more or less my whole life. My dad's an engineer. My brother is an engineer as well. And so kind of just headed that way. It seemed to be a good alignment with what my interests and abilities were. But in terms of the biological aspect of that, that was more of an open question as I went through high school and college and such. We just kind of gravitated towards it as it seemed like a really interesting area with lots of important problems to work on. Obviously, great strides being done by the community in that space, but plenty of big problems that still need to be solved. And a nice combination, I think, of biology, chemistry, and physics collectively. And so that led me to, chemical engineering, as I sit in the chemical engineering material science department for my role. But on the biological side of it, and that I think, as I said, there's just interesting problems to solve in that space. And it's a highly interdisciplinary discipline in itself, and I think that also appeals to me. And then as we pick, problems, whether they be cancer, infectious disease, antiviral work, et cetera, I think that's a combination of things that happen to be interesting, things that happen to be important and need advances, and things that happen to align with what our skill set, the students and myself in the lab happen to be. And so that's kind of how we continually, go about picking our problems that we try to bring some advances to.
Yeah, and there are a lot of problems, and especially from my aspect, the cancer world, and we hope that you, along with all the great researchers we have, are able to make some progress and solve a lot of these problems. And we're making steps in the right direction. But in terms of where I take this interview and where we go from here, I always like to end on this one question. And it's a loaded question, and you can you can answer it from a personal aspect, professional, combine it, whatever it is. But there's a lot of people that don't know what tomorrow looks like with coronavirus and COVID-19. We've had some civil unrest here in the Twin Cities and around the country. But in spite of it all, I think one thing that gets a lot of people through is hope. So with what's going on, what gives you hope?
Yeah, what gives me the most hope is just seeing the outpouring of support and activity and push for better in the multiple aspects of things you mentioned. So you mentioned coronavirus, you mentioned civil unrest with the last several weeks here in the cities and globally. You mentioned the other aspects of things we work on, cancer, and you mentioned education previously. I think in all of those spaces, there's a tremendous number of people that are pushing forward to continually improve in each of those areas. I think there's important challenges in all of those areas, and that's why there are so many of us working at that. But I think the important part is to be, honest with ourselves about the importance and the challenge that faces us, while equally being optimistic to say that we and others are going to continue to make improvements and advances in that space. And so it's a combination of optimism and rolling up the sleeves and doing the hard work it takes to make progress in that space. And I think if you just look in the past, we've made good progress in many of those areas. And in many of those areas, we need even more progress. And so, my lab's just doing, its part, hopefully, to contribute to that progress, but certainly just looking around the university and the globe for that matter, seeing all the people really making great strides in that space. One can't help but be hopeful and optimistic about that. And certainly the Cancer Center is doing a great job in that realm.
Yeah, and if you want to contribute, I'm going to do the pitch one more time. That link is going to be below in the information here. Or if you're out running on the streets of Minneapolis, look for Dr. Hackel. He will be out there. I guarantee it. He might put in a few more miles. Like, I'm not going to join you. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to be out there. My running days are far behind me. But, find him on the streets. And thank you so much, Dr. Hackel. This was a pleasure. And we thank you for talking with me today.
The pleasure was mine, Max. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you again. And we'll see all of you next time on our next edition of Fields of Study.